when I was in high school, just 3-4 years ago, I was able, my last year, I recognized I had already taken all of college prep. And so I decided to leave high school early, but before I left high school, one of the classes I had to fill my time with was camping. And it was a torturesome class. We had to learn to rock climb and to rappel and things of that nature. And in Roswell, Georgia, where I went to high school, there was about a 65-foot cliff off of a river. And so after school, once a week, part of my class was we had to go to the rocks and we had to learn how to rock climb and to rappel. And I loved it. I ended up buying the little funny looking shoes and the harness and the rock climbing gear, everything else. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful time. I ended up going regularly, 4 or 5 days a week. I'd go out and just rock climb, just by the river. You'd hear the noise of the music and just relax. But I remember one time my relaxing went away because a guy came out there and he just was not the sharpest tool in the shed, if you've heard that before. Because we're climbing on the wall, not doing any rappelling, and all of a sudden we see an orange electrical cord fly over the side of the mountain. Now, you know, an orange electrical cord, you can kind of see one here. And a guy decided he didn't have a rope, so he was just going to use an orange electrical cord to rappel with. And I said, "Who's up there?" Because I'm just thinking, this is not a good idea at all. And a guy just walked around the side of the mountain. You could do that. And he goes, I'm just going to rappel some. I wanted to make sure nobody was in the way. I was like, I appreciate that, but are you going to rappel with the electrical cord? And he says, yeah, it'll hold me. And I said, I don't think it will. He goes, it'll be fine. I hung on it at my house. And I had a friend pull on it, and it didn't break, so we're good. And I said, whatever. And so he walked back up around. You could see he was, tying himself into the electrical cord. This is a true story. I don't know. Maybe it's because it's Georgia. I'll make fun of myself. I don't know. All of a sudden, you see this guy coming over the side, and this cliff was a ceiling, and then it just kept going for about 15 feet, and then you'd have the rock face. So all you did was hang, free air, when you were rappelling. There was no feet on the rock. Again, this guy's not the brightest light or anything else. And he's rappelling, and I'm going, this is just not good. And you can see the orange rope doing like this, like the ways it's not supposed to do like this. So follow me here. And he's about 15 feet off the ground, and all of a sudden, snap. It just broke. And you heard everybody go, oh. It's one of those, kind of like you deserve it. Of course, he's laying on his back, and we go and we check on him, and nobody ran because I don't think we felt that sorry for him. I don't know what that says about who I am in my heart, but we walk up to him and, how are you? He goes, I hurt, man. And I go, really? Really? What, can you walk? He goes, yeah, I think I should go home. I said, maybe go to the emergency room. And he goes, I'll be fine. And he walks away. I looked at my friend who was with me that day, and I said, that's how you learn what not to do. Right? You've all had those moments. You have those moments when you learn something not to do. I tell people all the time, learn from my mistakes, and you don't have to make any. Because I've made them all. You follow me on this. Well, we've been talking about David, a man after God's own heart, and it's a series right now of exploring what that is. And today we're actually looking at King Saul, because King Saul had such a huge role in David's life. And honestly, I need to look at King Saul because from his life, often we've learned what not to do. You follow me? Yes or no? Yes. I mean, how often do, as a parent, I look at my children even now, you probably don't want to do that. You might get hurt. And 34 seconds later, I'm putting Band-Aids all over my kid's head. Whatever it is. Because they don't listen, you have to discover it for yourself. But we look at King Saul, and we're going to discover so much of who we should not be, so that we can have a heart after God. And that's our role today. That's what we're going to be trying to do. And again, it's just that opportunity we have to reflect upon someone's life in the Word of God and learn more about it. I want to give you a little bit of history here, and this is, I'm not used to preaching from my computer. I'll do this so you don't have to see all the notes and everything I'm about to say. Thank you, Alan. I'm not used to doing this, so we'll just try our very best. I want to give you a little bit of history, though, about King Saul. You first need to know that Saul was the first king of Israel. We know that he had 5 children. Jonathan is one of those. He's the one who's the most well-known, who was the apparent heir to the throne. So I hope that you already know a little bit about this. They were a member of the tribe of Benjamin, being born just north of Jerusalem in the hill country there. And he and his wife, again, they had 5 children, best known being Jonathan. They lived roughly 950 to 1,050 years before the time of Christ. When he became king, the Israelite tribes actually, they were on the verge of a collapse, a military collapse. They had no military presence, and because they had no military presence, everybody would come and beat up on them. It's an easy way to think about it. The Philistines, who were very powerful and had an enormous military presence, had settled along the Mediterranean coast. And they had planned on taking control of all of Palestine. And the Philistine army had already come. They had crushed the Israelites. They had taken control of everything west of the Jordan. And so Saul summoned an army of volunteers, and he gradually ended up defeating the Ammonites, which was a huge victory. They had never really had a military victory of any sort. And as a result, this victory, military victory, it somewhat propelled Saul into the kingship, because people were happy with this. Now, he didn't have full support of everyone by any means, but it did propel him into the kingship. And so here he comes as the new king of Israel, still recognizing that they had inadequate weapons and other things of that nature. But here he is, taking over the kingship. Now, you need to remember both King Saul and also David had been anointed with oil by the prophet Samuel as being the king. For Saul, in 1 Samuel chapter 9, 15 through 17, we discover that, and we see that unfolding when he was appointed to be the king. For David, that was in 1 Samuel chapter 16, beginning with verse 1. Saul had an extremely difficult job. Why? Because, as I've already said, he was the first king. It's hard to be first. He had a difficult job because there was no previous king, simply because the Israelites wanted to make sure that God was the one and only true king. And they were afraid that if they put a person with that type of authority, if they put a person in that type of position, that it would take away the emphasis they have for God to be their king. And so this is a concern of many. They didn't want anything to undermine the central position of God as king. We can learn a lot from that already, and that concern that the Israelites had. But one of the things that we struggle, or we learn about from Saul, and the things that he struggled with, is that for Saul, his biggest struggle was that he constantly reigned and made decisions with the wrong motive. That's one of the things we're going to learn about today. I don't know about how you make decisions and what dictates the decisions that you make, the choices that you make. But he made a lot of bad choices because he made them with he had the wrong motive. He wanted to prosper. He wasn't necessarily concerned with God prospering. Saul always seemed to compromise the commands of God, refusing to wait on the Lord. And I think often we sometimes ask God for something with the wrong motive. Maybe. And do you want more money so that you can buy things that are frivolous, or do you want more money to glorify God and to help others, to spread the kingdom? That's just one example. Do you want good health so that you can do anything you want in life, or so that you can have a longer life to serve Him? I always think about Paul. For the powerful words he says, to live is Christ, to die is gain. The reason he's saying that is, listen, I'd much rather go be with God. But as long as He wants to use me so that I can serve Him and bring glory to Him, may I live a long life. That's really what that's about. He had the right motive. Saul often had the wrong motive. And so we learned that from Saul without a doubt. I'm going to invite you to turn to 1 Samuel chapter 13. 1 Samuel chapter 13. Obviously, it's not going to be online today, but 1 Samuel chapter 13. I'm going to begin with verse 1, and I'll keep telling you where I am, so if you're not there yet, you'll be able to keep up or catch up in just a second. But Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned over Israel 42 years. That's a pretty good length of time. And he had chosen several thousand men. I'm just going to run through this. And he had chosen several of them to come with him to fight. Now, some of the men he actually sent back to their homes, but he had his son Jonathan there with him, and Jonathan attacked the Philistine outpost, and the Philistines heard about this very thing. Now, you got to remember, Israel had a very weak military presence. The Philistines had a very strong military presence, and yet here, the son of the king, who is heir to the apparent throne, the apparent heir to it, here he is, and he's helping to attack the Philistine outpost. Saul had the trumpet blown throughout the land and said, "Let the Hebrews hear." Verse 4, so all Israel heard the news. Saul has attacked the Philistine outpost, and now Israel has become a stench to the Philistines. And the people were summoned to join Saul at Gilgal. The Philistines assembled to fight Israel with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. That would be called a lot. They went up and camped at Michmash, and it tells us later on that when the men of Israel saw that their situation was critical and that their army was hard-pressed, they what? They hid in caves and thickets. Their king had called them, had summoned everybody to come together to fight, and yet as soon as they see what they were against, they went and they hid in caves and thickets, among the rocks, and in pits and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of God and Gilead. So Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. He waited 7 days, and this is the very time that Samuel had set for him to wait upon him to return. Okay, but we know that Samuel had not returned, and so he said to the men, "Bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings." And Saul offered up to the burnt offering. And just as he finished making the offering, Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to greet him. Samuel said to him in verse 11, "What have you done?" I'll give you a quick summary. King Saul had already had a military victory, and so he gets really confident in what he wants to do. He calls everybody to come together. He's going to fight the Philistines, but as soon as they see how many troops the Philistines now have, they start to quake in their boots, and so they go and hide. They get scared, and so they run away. They hide in caves and in thickets, and they do everything to basically get away from the situation. But the prophet Samuel had already told him, "Listen, what I want you to do is just wait here for 7 days. I'll come back and I'll let you know what's going on in short," okay? But the 7 days had come and gone, and so of course he became more and more fearful. And so he goes and he takes and he offers sacrifices to God. Samuel said to him, "What have you done?" And here's the response of Saul in verse 11. "When I saw that the men were scattering, and that you did not come at the set time, and that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash, I thought, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have sought the Lord's favor. So I felt compelled to offer the burnt offering." And this response of Samuel in verse 13 is this: "You responded or acted foolishly. You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all times." Because he acted with wrong motives, because he acted in terms of wanting to benefit himself, and because he responded out of fear, he made a decision on his own rather than going to God or listening to the prophets from God and obeying him. And as a result, this is what he hears. Now check this out. Often we don't think of disobedience this way, do we? But he was disobedient, and so the prophet of God, Samuel, came to Saul and told him these things. You have not kept the command the Lord your God gave you. If you had, he would have established your kingdom over Israel for all time. Automatically, I know that if I have disobeyed God, and God comes and says, "You've done a stupid thing here," and then he says, "I would have given you an incredible kingship, but now I'm not." Your stomach sinks, doesn't it? And we don't think of disobedience this way. We think of disobedience and go, I'll do better next time. There is a consequence to disobeying God. Now, I told you before, this is an incredible opportunity to look at the life of Saul and learn what not to do. And so we have that opportunity today.